This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Welcome back to the Xcast. The truth is in here. I'm your host today, Carl Sweeney, and this is our mailbag episode for the penultimate episode of Season 11, Nothing Lasts Forever, and Clara Cook is with me. Hi, Clara.
Hi, Carl.
How are you, Clara? How's it going?
I'm good. I'm a little bit cold on this snowy morning.
Yeah, winter has returned in full force to the United Kingdom at the minute. So, well, let's just head straight into it, Clara. What did you make of Nothing Lasts Forever? Did you like it?
I did like it. I really enjoyed it, actually. I thought it was both creepy and kind of gross, you know, in the sort of traditional X-File episode that's a little bit gross, like sort of in terms of body parts and eating body parts. But I also thought it was quite touching, some of the scenes between Mulder and Scully. I did feel the pacing was slightly confusing. Like I wasn't quite sure whether we were going to get more a backstory to do with the vigilante. And it all seemed to end quite quickly, so end very abruptly. And the explanation for why this cult was eating people was given very late in the episode. So I felt like the pacing could have been a bit better.
Yeah, some of the people who've got in touch with us raise similar points. So let's dive into the mailbag. So starting off first with people who posted on our Facebook group, X-Files Basement, and we'll begin with Bethany Good, who says, I'm actually not sure if I will ever be able to watch the full episode again. I'm not sure how this got through the censors. It was so disturbing. Watching on my iPad with headphones may have made it worse, since I could acutely hear every slurp or cracking of bones. Though I admit that I have never been a fan of gore in general, I felt like it was overkill with the bloody cannibalistic imagery. I kept thinking, okay, we get it, they like to eat people, enough with the blender already. There were some cool aspects of the story, though. The sister seeking revenge and slaying cult members was really something different for the X-Files. Maybe they could have had more scenes with her instead of all the scenes in the cult lair. The banter between Mulder and Scully was nice. The scenes set in the church were beautiful. I liked getting more background on Scully's faith. The characterization seemed right on. As far as the last scene with Mulder and Scully, the tone of that scene was ceremonial, and I felt like it was quite gorgeously shot. I certainly felt like the rug was pulled out from under me. I should have known. Despite that, it does seem like they have recommitted to each other in some way. I think when she says the rug being pulled out, I think she's referring to the fact that like the trailers had made it seem like there might be a kiss. But let's just talk a bit more about like the gore, because like I must admit I'm not very sensitive to that kind of thing, so it didn't really bother me at all. But it sounds like Bethany had a really like visceral reaction to it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite sensitive to gore, and I thought it was quite gory. I thought the end of the episode is basically a bloodbath. So basically people just started dying all over the place, which was kind of horrible. I thought it was pretty gross in the way that a lot of like the episode Season 4 Home is really disgusting. I always kind of feel a bit grossed out after that. But also there's an episode where Hungry, where there's a sort of young man stroke, I don't know, what would you call him, monster, eating people's brains in that episode. And I felt the same way about this episode as I did about that. There's just something about eating like the sort of raw bloody organs of something that's just really, I think, visceral and disgusting. The organ smoothie, the surgeon tasting the pancreas. I mean, ugh. And the idea of attaching two people is horrific. I came straight out of like the Human Centipede or whatever it is, that horror film. So I actually agree with her. I thought it was very disgusting, and it seemed like, for me, it seemed like disgusting to discuss people. She's right. I don't think it had a wider point than that. So.
Yeah, I thought it was like an interesting mix though of like the sacred and the profane, because like some of the stuff in the church was like so gorgeous, and then it's kind of meshed together with the complete opposite, really. Like the licking of the pancreas, I will admit that was a bit disgusting, and the stitches were a bit icky, weren't they?
Yeah.
Right, Caradwen Foley said, "Wow, I thought this episode was riveting. Fiona Vroom was sublimely creepy, and Carlina Britch was somehow both coldly menacing and tender. She being Juliet, the Avenger. The direction was outstanding. I felt like I was in Barbara's house. I liked how they salted in the exposition of the procedural aspects instead of playing out every story beat on screen. It really propelled the story forward and made time for so many secondary characters to be fully fleshed out. The time we got with Mulder and Scully also felt very meaningful. I adored the way the final scene ended. A secret between confidants instead of a kiss is so perfectly, classically X-Files in the best possible way." I mean, I'm interested in what she says about like salting in the exposition instead of playing it all out on screen, because I think you can argue this either way. I know when I spoke to Darren for the podcast the other day, he pointed this out, that he felt like more attention needed paying to those story beats. But there's no denying, is there? It does take a huge leap forward, because like when Mulder and Scully turn up at that apartment building, it's a bit like, what happened? And Scully just, offhand says, "Oh yeah, we put a sensor in her heart, and then we let the organs be stolen." And I don't know. What do you make of it?
There's not as much police procedural story in this episode as there is in, say, for instance, Kitten, which also has a gross out factor of people being impaled by stakes and holes in the ground and stuff like that. But there's more than Scully sort of going through the crime, talking about it, talking to the local police chief, that kind of thing. In this, I think they just dismissed the police that were at the scene right at the beginning, and that was it. And you're right, there was much more attention paid to the actual cult and not as much paid to how Mulder and Scully actually got to the cult's lair and how they actually managed to work out the crime. And right away, immediately, Mulder's thinking there's something sort of sinister and nefarious here to do with evil or some sort of paranormal aspect or belief, like vampires or something. And I don't know if a whole bunch of doctors who were murdered at an organ transplant operation, I'm not sure that's the first thing I would think of. Like, maybe somebody had some sort of problem with organ donation, or they had some sort of religious belief that human beings shouldn't be used for organ donation. Scully doesn't really make any sort of other kind of claim, does she?
No, but I think part of that, wasn't Mulder kind of just messing around with the young agents, to try and kind of play up to his image in a way, when he starts talking about the stakes and stuff?
Yeah, that's true. I do sort of think that he possibly can believe some of that stuff himself, though.
Quite possibly, yeah. What I sort of feel is that I think they are flaws in the episode, I think. But I think that what was good about this episode was so good, I'm sort of inclined at this stage to kind of overlook some of the things that are a bit weaker, because like the virtues were so strong, basically,
Yeah, the cult itself, the way it was portrayed and the sort of dynamic between Barbara Beaumont and her followers and her husband, who's the sort of doctor with his theoretical ideas about aging and halting the process of aging. I actually thought that was really good. And in fact, that in itself, I felt like it could have been longer. And I know they can't make it longer, but it felt like it could have been a longer story. Do you see what I'm saying? It could have been like a 2-hour episode. But I know they can't do that, so they had to sort of work with the time that they have.
I think it is fair to say that some of the climactic action felt a bit rushed or a bit perfunctory or something. So I suppose if there is a fault, it's particularly with that aspect of the episode, I think, anyway. But anyway, we'll come back. I know these first couple of messages have touched on the scenes in the church, but we'll get back to those later, I think. Anna Bastow, this was she's left a few messages on the Facebook group, but this was one of them where she said, a good thing about this one were the continuity shout-outs like Scully's sister and brother Charlie, Kirsch, living together, Scully liking dogs, their son, and Tad O'Malley talking about chemtrails. And yeah, I would agree. I think there were some nice touches in this episode. Like the Tad O'Malley thing wasn't too obtrusive. I think people, even might miss that. It's right at the start. You hear him on the car radio. But I also liked the call-outs to Charlie and that kind of thing as well. What did you think, Clara?
Yeah, I liked the call-outs to Scully's family, because once they're all gone and they're no longer in the actual series, it's easy to forget that she had this whole other life aside from the X-Files. And the fact that Mulder references it and sort of talks about, well, I think he kind of references it, doesn't, maybe not explicitly, but he sort of talks about how her life could have been if she'd walked straight out of his basement office. I thought that was really good, really interesting, because throughout the entire series, like from series 1 all the way up to series 11, there is this big question mark as to how different Scully's life would have been if she wasn't investigating the X-Files. The X-Files kind of chose Mulder. It's his sort of destiny, isn't it, really? But it's not the same for Scully. Scully's the audience. She's supposed to represent us, kind of involved in Mulder's quest for the truth. So we're sort of seeing things through her eyes, and I think it's sort of switched a little bit in the most recent series, where we're sort of now seeing things more through Mulder's eyes, and Scully is the one who's, got this belief in William and is fighting a bit more than Mulder is. It's her quest now. But you do wonder what her life would be like if she wasn't involved with the X-Files and she didn't know Mulder, and it's quite possible, sort of sadly, that she probably would have had a happier life. So it's nice to reference like the people in her family and her past and stuff.
Yeah, and it's a nice moment when she says, like, I don't begrudge you any of that, Mulder. Because, I mean, there are times in the original series, like, one would be, like, Little Green Men, where, like, Mulder's kind of, you know, disenchanted, and she's the one who kind of spurs him back into action, you know, and she's kind of bored with her assignment at Quantico. So, yeah, I liked the way Scully handled that moment in this episode, I think. All right, so C. Marie Schrader says, great episode despite all the goriness. Fiona Vroom was amazing as the old TV star and wacky cult woman. I was screaming when Scully fell, and I loved the vampire killer woman. The church scenes were beautiful. Yeah, and I think we should spend a minute or two on Fiona Vroom. Did you know she played the young Cassandra Spender in My Struggle 3, the first episode of the season?
I didn't, but I can see it now, actually.
Yeah, it was that little scene where they were watching the moon landing with young Jeffrey Spender. Yeah, this was a fantastic part, I thought, and she really attacked it with, like, gusto, didn't she?
Yeah, she was really good. I also think the way that she sang along with her old television program was really creepy, and the fact that she, the way she reacted to Mulder and Scully when they first confronted her, the way that she reacts to Scully is really hilarious. You know, sort of mentioning, she's like, oh, yes, of course, you can take a selfie with me. You know, sort of taunting Scully on her age and everything. Scully just basically is completely dryly unamused, doesn't rise to it, or very deadpan.
Yeah.
I thought that was really funny. It's nice to see a cult leader who's a woman. I know that sounds kind of crazy. Often cults and television programs the cult leaders are portrayed as men, which I think is probably because most cult leaders in the real world are men. It was nice to see this sort of faded kind of, I don't know, it sort of seemed like 1970s glamour, but I suppose it was probably earlier than that because her TV shows, she's supposed to be in the 80s, isn't she? So the TV show must come from the early era.
They sort of said that late 60s were like when her screen credits were, I think is what they said.
And the scene where she sings and one of her followers is basically murdered and kind of eaten to death. Eaten to death? Eaten. Well, he's dead, I think, at that point. Hopefully. Well, no, he's kind of eaten alive, isn't he? He's eaten alive.
Yeah.
That was horrible. That was really effective. That was perfect X-Files, like, storytelling there. That's X-Files all over. Something sort of innocent or just kind of something that's kind of comfortable and nice, like a song that everybody remembers, or a love song, or a white picket fence, or a little house, or a little nice cute town. And X-Files turns it on its head and says, no, actually, this thing you're comfortable with is something that's really, really creepy and really disgusting. And you're never going to look at this in the same way again. So the fact that she sang that song and it's kind of sweet while someone's being eaten alive in the background is really clever.
Yeah, I'm just a sucker for that kind of thing, you know, whenever they take an innocuous song like that and juxtapose it with something disgusting. I love it. Fantastic. Right, Marlene Stemmy said, I thought the episode was brilliant. The transitions between scenes and the continuing theme of giving life or taking life and how people give life to each other tied the three storylines together for me. I thought the cult leader Barbara was completely captivating, even as I watched her grand performance while peeping through my fingers, shielding my eyes. She seems like a macabre and quirky character out of Sunset Boulevard. That being the Billy Wilder film, of course. And the avenging sister came across as very human, which I didn't expect from her introductory scene. That last scene has been my ideal idea of Mulder and Scully for a very long time. All of the things they discuss have been latent in the revival, and David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson brought them to the forefront in a genuine and honest way that also marked a passage of time for Mulder and Scully. I also really liked what Mulder said about the choices we make and how that conversation came back in the end. Loved it. I expected something more dramatic to happen to Scully than falling into the trash bin, but I thought the light serendipity of her fate was a nice reference to the Goldberg variation. My only real complaint, aside from the fact that I won't be able to eat meat for a few days and will have to rewatch half the episode from under a blanket, is that the final scene between Scully and Mulder in the church isn't the last image of the series. So let's pick up on a couple of things there. I mean, yeah, I've had the same thought about Sunset Boulevard. She reminded me a little of it's Gloria Swanson's role in that film, Norma Desmond. She mentions Duchovny and Anderson, and I just wanted to say I think David Duchovny has been absolutely brilliant this season. I really do, and I didn't always feel that way in season 10, but this year he's been terrific, I think. Yeah,
his acting is really, really good. His acting is just on point, and I think in the last season it sort of seemed like David Duchovny playing Fox Mulder, and in this season he just seems like Fox Mulder, like he's completely embodied the role. I forget that it's David Duchovny. I would say that although I think Gillian Anderson is a brilliant actress, and I think she was a brilliant actress from episode 1 of season 1. I think she was on point straight from the beginning. I have to say, in this season, I just feel like she's struggling with it a bit more. She seems, or maybe it's just that Scully herself has changed as a character. but she doesn't seem to have that same sort of, as much as the easy camaraderie that she had in previous seasons. And I just wonder if maybe Gillian Anderson's a little bit tired of the role, or I don't know. No, she's reaching the end. But I felt that the scenes in the church were really natural. When they joke about her praying for a puppy, it's just really, really sort of really natural, like old friends or old lovers or whatever. And that was nice to see. I do think it's strange that they talk about the case in a church though, and they're whispering and everything.
Like, I don't know. What's the etiquette? You're not allowed to discuss police matters in a church, is it? I
mean, I don't think there's any. I mean, I'm pretty sure you can discuss whatever you want in a church, surely. But I mean, maybe you're whispering. Who's going to know? But it just seems like a funny thing. Like, I'm not sure that's something that I thought originally Scully would have wanted to do maybe years ago. Maybe she just knows Mulder so well. She knows that he's just gonna. It's nice when she says, I can meet you later, or you can wait for me. And he goes and he sits down and he waits, because he wouldn't have done that in previous seasons. He would have flown out of the church, with his big trench coat flapping behind him, sort of like, I'm off to do some investigating, while you dabbled with your silly religion. But this time he actually sat down and waited for her.
No, that's been consistent this year, though, that he's a bit less impetuous, he's a bit less bullheaded, like in Kitten, where he doesn't immediately confront Haley Joel Osment's character, and then in Familiar, when he sees the Hellhound and he sort of wisely backs away. I really like that. It does seem like natural that he's wised up a little bit in that sense, yeah. But no, I do agree with you about Anderson, and that's why I singled out the Duchovny, really. That I did think she was very good in this episode, but I think overall she's been much better in season 11 than she was in season 10. But I think there are still occasions where, I don't know if it's tiredness, I think she is just having a harder time finding Scully again. And I think Duchovny this year really has found Mulder, and I think with Anderson it's a little bit more hit and miss, but overall she's still been pretty good, I think. Marlene makes a good point, I think, about the final scene between Mulder and Scully. It almost could double up as a satisfying last image for the series, I think. Although, of course, Chris Carter might find something even better next week, mightn't he?
We can only hope. We can only hope. Yeah, it's a great end scene. I actually think the scene that I kind of would have liked, actually, to end the whole series was the scene in Followers, so not the last episode, but the episode before that, where they were in the diner and they were just kind of sitting there relaxing after having breakfast, sort of holding each other's hands. I was like, I'm fine with the series to end there, but I understand that they still have the mythology to sort of reconcile, to resolve. I don't know if that's actually going to happen, but we can at least try. But yeah, this is a great scene. It's a lovely scene, and it's kind of reminiscent of that scene at the end of Amor Fati, where they sort of declare their commitment to each other in the doorway of Mulder's apartment. It's a bit like that, and I know a lot of people wanted a kiss, but I just don't think that's very them. I also I'm not sure Scully would want to kiss in a church, but I also think, I mean, you do kiss in a church, don't you? I mean, people get married in churches, but I'm not sure she'd want to do that. But also, she's always been, I think Scully's a very private, emotionally reserved person. I think she's kind of had to learn to be that way, and I just don't think she's the kind of person to do something like that really openly. And I think that Mulder's more the one to do that sort of thing, to push it. So I think her whispering in his ear, it's her way of showing him like commitment or love, So I think she probably did say something quite loving, as much as I wanted her to say something really funny, like, I like your glasses, or
yeah. We'll come back to the whisper, because we got a few people like speculating about what was said. But I really love that final scene. I like the fact that it had time to breathe. It was about 4 or 5 minutes long, and that's why I'm a bit more forgiving of the perhaps rushed nature of the investigation, because I wouldn't want to have lost a second of that exchange, because it was so nice, I thought. So yeah, Mark O'Brien said, one-word review. Ew. That was a gross episode and very American Horror Story with excellent Mulder and Scully stuff. Great writing by Karen Nielsen. Was getting really emotional that last scene, thinking of the journey of the last 25 years. Also love they never revealed what the whisper was too. Yeah, I agree. I like the fact, I don't treat it as like a puzzle to be solved, like what did they say. I like the fact that we can't know that, I think. Unless they do try and talk about it again in the next episode, but I don't think they will. On American Horror Story, I've never seen that series. Have you, Clara? Because a few people have made this comparison.
Yes, I have, actually. And I'm not a horror fan, so I watched 4 series of it. And I found watching it actually quite a traumatic experience. I was scared a lot of the time and grossed out a lot of the time. And some of it is pretty bad, to be honest. But there is a few good series. There's a series about witches, which is really good. And there's also a series about people in a freak show in a circus, which is really good. It's also very, very funny and very witty. So this is actually kind of, he's right. This is very similar to American Horror Story. It's mixing that dark comedy, that sort of black comedy, that sort of satire, with something that's really disgusting. It is very American Horror Story, actually.
I must check it out at some point. I think James Wong is one of the creative forces behind that series, which is one of the other reasons people are making this comparison, I think. Jeremy Daniels also mentions it because he says, "This was a bit of a clunker for me. I'll have to give it a rewatch, but aside from the Mulder and Scully stuff, which felt a little out of place, I found this very forgettable. I kind of felt like Mulder and Scully wandered into an episode of American Horror Story. Also, not nearly as gross as I was expecting based on what I heard in advance." Yeah, that's how I felt as well, Jeremy, but everyone else on the planet seems to have been utterly disgusted with this episode. So there we are. Edin Dumasic says, "This episode can be seen as a commentary on the show itself. It kind of fights back and is bothered by its more superficial aging, e.g. Mulder's glasses. But as Mulder puts it to Dr. Levinas, aging is a natural progression. The revival has really acknowledged and embraced the passage of time and new realities for our heroes. Thankfully, Carter didn't just try to reverse time and recapture what X-Files was back in 1996. That's how you end up as sad as Barbara Beaumont." And, I think it's kind of appropriate that, like, the series, season 11 started with a couple of, like, high-octane episodes. So, like, episode 2 of this, you had Mulder and Scully, like, jumping over railings and, gunfights in their house and that kind of thing. So they're obviously still very sharp. They've got very keen physical capabilities. But I also like that we get this stuff which felt genuine too, like Mulder's deteriorating eyesight and that kind of thing. So I like that we're getting both, really. That they're kind of credible doing the action stuff, but they're also believable doing this kind of stuff, aren't they?
Yeah, and the scenes where Mulder's trying to read his phone, or he's trying to read something, and the sort of frustration and exasperation that he has with himself, not being able to, because he's basically needs reading glasses, I thought were really well done. That's really, really kind of amusing, very funny. Yeah, you're right. They started out jumping over banisters on stairs and railings and stuff, and then they ended up talking quietly in a church while holding hands, or whatever they were, talking to each other about. Yeah, it does feel a little bit like the show is winding down, which, in a good way,
Yeah.
I just wonder what's going to happen next. I worry that I know a lot of people who listen to the Xcast would like it to go on forever, but human like Scully was saying, aging's a natural process. Human beings don't go on forever. I kind of feel like the show should end, but that's my personal opinion.
No, well, I mean, if we get a satisfying resolution next week, then if it's the end, then I'm happy. But I mean, we've got like 6 million unresolved plot threads, so I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, I mean, stories should come to an end, shouldn't they? Stories probably shouldn't be spun out in perpetuity.
Cough, cough, Star Wars, cough, cough. Anyway.
Yeah. If next week we see the episode and we're like, okay, well, that's a good ending, then, I'll be happy. However, that may not happen. Time will tell. Final message for now from Facebook, from Ryan Sprague, who says, "This episode was such an unbelievable letdown. The assassin role was ridiculous, and the third act was so rushed as to leave room for that disjointed scene at the end with Mulder and Scully. I really, really did not like the writing in this one, y'all. Such a letdown heading into next week." I mean, I sort of agree with him that the third act was a bit rushed, or, the final act was a bit rushed, but I disagree that scene with Mulder and Scully was disjointed. I think that's where I differ with Ryan,
I think an odd bit is when the vigilante at the end sort of comes up to Mulder and Scully, who are both sort of shocked by what's just happened, and just sort of says, "I don't regret it." And I'm like, who asked you? Mulder and Scully kind of look at her like, what? Like, what are you? Who are you? And what's going on? And why? And then the next thing we know is that she's obviously in prison. That felt a little bit like they were just trying to tie up that plot end really quickly. It might have been good to have the vigilante in a separate episode, and then this cult in a separate episode.
Yeah, I like the image of the mother who kind of lost one daughter but had the other returned, but now she's lost the other daughter. But I do agree a bit about her Juliet's speech. I think on Facebook, I haven't got the message here, but I think Jeremy Daniels said it was like the episode of The Simpsons where Poochie's introduced and he gives a speech at the end saying, right, I'm off back to my home planet now, which it felt a bit Crowbardian, I think. Yeah, I think it's fair. Let's head to Twitter then. We got MKB says, the longer the ep went on, the more I liked it. Very gruesome and violent. Barbara was played expertly. Thought there was too little Mulder and Scully investigating. Loved the MSR though, especially Mulder finally being mature about Scully's faith and them talking about their future. Yeah, on first watch I thought maybe there could have been a little bit more Mulder and Scully, but it all seemed a little bit smoother second time round, I have to say.
Yeah, I think they had to have the cult in there, didn't they? And that takes up a big part of the episode. And they have to, it does take a while to explain why these people are eating other humans. You have to kind of explain that. I think if you start out with a shocking image like a surgeon licking a pancreas, you have to spend a certain amount of time explaining that. So unless Mulder and Scully are going to explain it to each other, basically explaining it to the audience through talking to each other, unless you're going to have that, and they don't really have that in this episode, then you've got to have the cult leader kind of explaining why she's doing it. And then also the doctor at the end explaining it to Mulder. So that takes up time, which means you have less Mulder and Scully.
I like the way it's signalled early on, though, where before we have the teaser, don't we? And then I think the first thing after the teaser is we get this quick scene of Scully in the church. There's like a slow-mo shot of her walking through the church. And I sort of took that as a bit of a signal, like, okay, there's going to be a bit of contemplation in this one. It's not all going to be investigative. So I think that scene sort of got me in the right mindset for the story, I think.
She's also in the church. She's also having communion, so she's also eating and then the priest sort of says the body of Christ and the blood of Christ. So that does kind of link to the scenes that are going to happen later, where people are. I mean, obviously it's not Christ, but they're eating and drinking the physical body of somebody. So the writer's kind of contrasting Scully's religious practice with this kind of disgusting evil practice of eating these people. It's funny though, I had this conversation with my parents on Christmas Eve because I just become a vegetarian for like environmental and moral reasons, and my dad used to be a journalist, so he was kind of critiquing me and not critique, but he was kind of interviewing me about it, sort of really pushing and why, going through all the different reasons, and eventually ended up in sort of saying, like, I was talking about eating animals, not people, eating animals that are aware, and conscious and sort of have some sort of mental comprehension. And he was like saying, well, all animals have mental comprehension. Why don't we eat humans? And so we had this long conversation on Christmas Eve over dinner, why we don't eat humans. And as soon as I watched this episode, I thought, yeah, Dad, we should watch this with me. This would be a world where, just for record, my dad is not in favour of eating humans. But, we just started really thinking about it. Why don't people eat other people? All of us came to the conclusion that it was a bad idea, but we debated the subject.
Fascinating. I mean, I was reading a book recently. I had a character who was like a Jainian, Jainian, like an ultra-Orthodox one, and wouldn't even eat like plant life and stuff. So, yeah, fascinating topic. Perhaps we can get more into it some other time, I guess. And Cortland said, I love this episode both for its horrifying cult plot and its character moments. My only critique is that there was so much to process both visually and in the dialogue that the vigilante story was overshadowed. Still a great penultimate episode that goes high in my season 11 ranking. Yeah, I think it goes high in mine too, although I think there's been a lot of good stuff in season 11. I find it quite hard to sort them into order, I think that pretty much every episode has had some things that have irked me, but most of them have had stuff that I've really been fond of too,
Yeah, every episode in this season, apart from My Struggle 3, that's for me personally, I know a lot of people liked it, has had something in it that I've really enjoyed. Whether it's the banter from Mulder and Scully or just the sheer creepiness of characters in the story, like Familiar, I just found that incredibly creepy, and I think that's really effective. That's kind of what you want from the X-Files.
Okay, so Christian Villacorte said, love the kookiness of Beaumont and the Mulder and Scully banter delving into old age. The science behind the age regression through the consumption of body organs was rather vague for me, though. Was it giving the cultists some sort of high as well? And Dina Ferrari said, fantastically weird, difficult to drink my smoothie the next morning. Appreciated the connection to a science story I remember. Company planning to offer infusions of young people's blood to older people based on a mouse study using parabiosis. It's actually a thing. Yikes. Yeah, if there's one aspect of the story I haven't as yet fully got my head around it was the science, because I know Dr. Levinas does talk a bit about it towards the end of the episode, doesn't he? But I need to go back and have another look, I think. What did you make of the scientific elements here?
Yeah, I thought it was. I didn't realize there was some sort of scientific, maybe not truth, but there's some sort of scientific basis in it. I just thought that was all completely made up, and I'm kind of okay with that, because there's lots of stories in science fiction about people trying to live forever or trying to be young forever. It's kind of odd, actually, that people are so obsessed with trying to be young forever. I mean, just the other day I watched Annihilation on Netflix, and right at the beginning of it, one of the characters sort of says that aging isn't actually a natural process; it's a fault in our genes, and it's like a biological fault that we age. And I was sort of thinking, what? No. I mean, that may be true, but that's a weird way of looking at it. So that kind of passed me by, I have to say. I don't have a problem with aging. It's going to happen anyway.
I suppose the whole story, it's kind of a vampire story, isn't it, really? But there was like a sheen of scientific dialogue that was introduced. And, I mean, the tagline was changed as well, wasn't it, to I want to be beautiful. And, I mean, this is something the series has covered before, like Season 4, Sanguinarium, another very bloody episode. I think what's different about this one, and what makes it worthwhile to do something with some similarities, is the fact that it allows us now to look at the middle-aged Mulder and Scully, like we said. Whereas in Sanguinarium, Mulder's kind of like looking in the mirror at his nose and considering having some surgery and whatever, but it's not that credible because, he's at the height of his like physical appeal, I suppose, at that time.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
David Duchovny.
All right, so let's just do a few more. And Sophia Inez said, every interaction between Mulder and Scully was perfect. Case was bizarre and gore-filled, quite X-Filey. But what was the whispering all about? Yeah, so like we said, I don't think it's something we should know, and I don't think it's something that's going to be discussed again. And I like that. I think that perhaps the marketing did this episode a disservice for a lot of people. I mean, this is one of the reasons I was trying to avoid the promos and stuff, because I think people were hoping for like a kiss or something, and obviously that isn't what happened. So maybe it'll be one that if people were disappointed with that on first watch, maybe in the fullness of time they'll come to, they'll be able to accept it a bit more, I guess.
I think the studio very deliberately markets to the shippers. So I think it markets to people who are like mythology fans, but I think it particularly markets to the shippers, and I think that's a little bit insidious because there's also this sort of resistance to satisfy shippers with the writing and the direction. There's this kind of like stringing people along over many, many years, but yet continually marketing. It's like we want you to watch, but we also don't want to ever give you complete satisfaction. And then I think the resistance to shippers' outrage when they don't get complete or get satisfaction is a little bit unfair. I don't think you can string along a fan group of people, continually tease them, and then sort of kind of act a little bit affronted when they're unhappy with the fact that they don't have the result that you sort of teased them with. So I get how shippers would be pissed off by this, and I also understand how they would probably focus a lot of their irritation on Chris Carter, although I don't necessarily think that's completely right, because Chris Carter didn't write this episode. In a lot of the episodes in the most recent series, and actually throughout the entire series, he didn't actually write. So a lot of the sort of stylistic and creative decisions are made by other writers and other directors. And obviously some people who were making the show were more into Scully and Mulder as a couple, and some people were less into Mulder and Scully as a couple. So their relationship sort of yo-yoed back and forth because it's seen through the eyes of several different people. It's not seen through the eyes of one creative person. So to focus all your vitriol on one person is not fair and not nice. But I do think that to tease people with the idea of a kiss is a little bit irresponsible. I think they could have teased them with some other kind of shipper moment, and people wouldn't have had this reaction. I can see why they're pissed off about it. But on the other hand, though, it doesn't bother me because I've never thought Mulder and Scully are a conventional couple. I've never thought that at all. I like that they're not conventional. They don't have conventional lives. They're interesting and different and adventurous, and that's why we like them. And I think that the whisper, the thing that she said to him, is between them. And I don't think you need to know. I mean, you can just see from Mulder's face. It's obviously something lovely, or something she's obviously saying something that's getting an emotional reaction out of him, like a commitment to something, or a gesture of love, or something reassuring to him, you know. And before, he's expressing guilt. So, like, a couple seconds before that, he's expressing guilt about the effect he's had on her life, and she's making him feel better. And I think that's kind of sweet. So, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, well, I think the marketing will kind of disappear into the ether, won't it? Whereas people will continue to like rewatch the episode. So
I think they just want people to watch the series, and that's why they market it a certain way.
Yeah, of course. And I agree with what you said about Chris Carter. You know, obviously Karen Nielsen wrote it. It sounds like Glenn Morgan and James Wong had some input too. So, I mean, let's wait until next week. I mean, I'm sure we'll have some opportunities to criticise Chris Carter next week, you know. Hopefully not, though. But just on the whispering, I know you asked people on Twitter, Clara, didn't you, for some ideas about what might have been said, and we had a couple of people come back, people we've already heard from. So Cortland said, I'm pretty sure it was just Gillian saying, everyone's worried about a cliffhanger in the finale. I'll just whisper now and drive them really fucking crazy. And Dina Ferrari said, I read the writer meant the whisper to be a mystery, like the gifts at the end of How the Ghost Stole Christmas. I love that. It's still fun to wonder what the gifts are on every rewatch, and I think it will be the same for the whisper. And yeah, that's exactly how I took it, you know. I think I even was thinking about that moment in How the Ghost Stole Christmas, that it's nice that they've got this kind of secret to themselves, isn't it, the characters?
I think that that's kind of similar with a lot of stuff in the X-Files. You know, you see something, but you don't see the whole. You see part of the mystery, but you don't see the whole mystery. And I read someone on Twitter sort of saying, like, this is what fan fiction was invented for. It's exactly what fan fiction was invented for. You know, it was supposed to fill in the gaps that, like, audiences are, like, imagining, you know, that the script writer hasn't actually explicitly said. But I'm not sure it's the job of a writer in a television program to lay out everything explicitly, is it? That's not really the point of good television, is so that we see everything explicitly. Part of it is that we're supposed to be involved in the story, and you're involved in the story if you have to sort of work something out, or if you have to sort of imagine something. So maybe that's what this kind of sort of little scene was about.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, this might not be your experience, so just tell me, but like, it seems to me like there are some television fans who kind of crave and need everything to be spelled out in a way that's never been my experience. You know, I'm really happy with, like, I mean, up to a point, I'm happy with, like, things being left dangling, or, you know, a certain amount of things not being resolved. I think if you go the other way and you need everything to be lined up in continuity and stuff, it's kind of, you're kind of setting yourself up for disappointment, I think, especially with something like the X-Files.
I think everything that's when there's a TV program where everything is shown and everything is explicitly laid out for you, I don't have to work, I don't have to use my brain that much, and I'm just passively observing. And I feel that that kind of television is fun and interesting, or not interesting, but like fun and relaxing for when you just want something to buzz out with. But it's not necessarily what I consider really good quality kind of exciting television. So yeah, I want the X-Files to be exciting, intriguing, and I want it to make me think. So I don't want everything laid out for me. And laying out everything for the audience and showing everything and explicitly telling the audience everything would completely get rid of the mystery. Imagine if, like, in the first series, you know, Mulder and Scully found an alien. I mean, I suppose they kind of did, didn't they, in the first episode? But if they found the alien, they knew what the alien was. Aliens had landed. They'd met human beings and they were living with human beings. Mulder had, like, an alien flatmate. I mean, it would be a completely different kind of show, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It wouldn't be. There'd be no mystery. The whole point is that we don't know. We don't know. The truth is out there and we have to discover it. So it's making the audience work a bit, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm like letting the creators off the hook for everything, though. I mean, there does come a time when you want some answers and things. Speaking of things not being resolved, Clara, next week promises My Struggle 4. Yeah, let's just talk about this quickly. So, final episode of season 11, and let's stay spoiler free. I don't know if you know any spoilers. I know some listeners even avoid the promos, so let's just talk about this, you know, hopes for this episode. I mean, what are you hoping for? What would satisfy you from Chris Carter next week?
It would be nice to see a cigarette-smoking man die.
Mm-hmm.
It would be nice to see him
again
finally die. Like, and I mean properly, like, his cold dead body, you know, like no sort of I can be reconstructed in some sort of a miracle surgery. No, it'd be nice to see him die. It would be nice to see Scully get some sort of resolution to this story arc of the fact that she may have been sort of inseminated against her will, and also it would be nice for Mulder and Scully to achieve some sort of closure and happiness when it comes to William. I'm not saying they have to be with William or be in a family with him or anything, but it would be nice that they're not going to go through the rest of their lives with some sort of torturous regret. I do think that the mythology, I don't know how it can be resolved in one episode, because they opened it up, it was sort of resolved, you know, but now it turns out it's not aliens, it's men, and I think that that's a problem. I don't think they can resolve it in one episode, and I don't think it will be. So
I think we've got to remember that, you know, Chris Carter isn't ultimately the one who decides whether there'd be a season 12. So I think he sort of has had to construct, you know, it seemed like My Struggle 3 was setting some things up which could possibly continue to play into a hypothetical season 12. Even though at this stage it doesn't look like, we don't know for sure, it doesn't look like it will transpire. I would like to see Monica Reyes, like, disavow the cigarette smoking man, you know.
Yeah.
And maybe burst into whale song or something. You know, I think that'd be nice.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm not engaged with William really at all. I think because, I was sort of saying to a friend of mine the other day, because there's been so many versions of William, I don't feel emotionally attached to any of them. Because he's been, you know, he's been several different babies, and then he's been, there's this idea that, these sort of imagined ideas that Mulder and Scully had of William, and then there's the real William, who was also sort of seems like, you know, because he was adopted, he had another identity. It sounds awful, but I don't think the actor is really that good enough an actor to carry a whole episode or story by himself. So I know people are really invested in seeing them as a family, but I don't think I really feel that way.
Well, we'll soon find out, Clara, won't we? Because it's only a few days away now, really, My Struggle 4. So, yeah, and on the Xcast, I mean, Tony will be back with Darren Mooney next week for the, you know, the recap podcasts about My Struggle 4. I'll be back next week with the Mailbag. Clara, where can people find you online if they would like to?
So you can find me on Facebook on the Xcast Basement Facebook group, which is where we all talk together as fans of the X-Files. It's a nice community, so if you want to have a chat, head over there. You can also find me on Twitter at ClaraJeanMC.
Excellent stuff, and yeah, thanks for joining me today, Clara. Always a pleasure. In the meantime, listeners, you can, if you want to support the podcast, you can go to Patreon and have a look at what we're offering there. So it's patreon.com/the Xcast. As Clara's just said, X-Files Basement's a good place to hang out, and most of us from the podcast are over there. And yeah, it's a really nice group, I think. So it'd be good to see people there. And Twitter, our handle is @theX_cast. My Struggle 4 is imminent, but until next time, listeners, trust no one.